Northeast Norfolk's a richly varied area of countryside and waterside, from beautiful broadland to nostalgic poppyland, from quaint seaside resorts to charming country villages. Inland, Reefham offers a delightful scene with its wide market square, surrounded by elegant Georgian buildings, colourful shops, houses and pubs. Though the cattle market is no more, a small Wednesday market still survives. Winding back through time, the narrow streets and alleys lead to hidden corners, their names rich with the scent of brewing beer and freshly baked bread, or with the rattle of horses' hooves down Smuggler's Lane. Much of the village is now a conservation area and has a quiet charm all its own. There are 2 adjoining churches. Originally there were 3. Legend says they were endowed by 3 sisters whose mutual hostility led them each to build a church so that their worship was unsullied by the presence of the others. Time has changed the nature of the village, now mainly a commuter settlement for Norwich businessmen, but the outward face of the buildings has changed little. Perhaps one of the most drastic upheavals in recent years was the closure of the railways. Reefham once had 2 stations, now closed and shuttered, but the route has been given new life as Marriott's Way Long Distance Path, named after the local railway engineer who devoted 40 years of his life to the line. Next stop is Aylsham, the major market town of the area, and people flock to the regular market and auction days, all with a keen eye for an unusual bargain.
Just been ran in. Size 8. Very good. Size 8. Where do you want them? A couple of pounds? Madge, do you sell second-hand shoes?
Locals have secretive bidding techniques off to a fine art.
6 for 1-inch netting. Where do you want them? Kennel roll? 5 £5 a metre, 5 at 5 £5 a metre, 5.50, 5.50, 5.50. At 5.50 and £6 a metre, 6 at £6. At £6 a piece. All on at £6, take you 2. Right, I'll book it. 3 foot for half inch.
Locally grown fruit and vegetables, flowers and shrubs, furniture, timber, vehicles, bathtubs, antiques, pigs, chickens, you name it, and you could find it here. The marketplace at the centre of the town. The name of the pub suggests a historical connection with black-robed monks. There's a wide range of shops and businesses, always a busy hub of activity, especially on market days. Just behind the square stands the peaceful church of St. Michael. Here the famous garden and landscape designer Humphrey Repton is buried. In summer his memorial is surrounded by fragrant roses, and the inscription reads, "Mouldering, blending, melting into earth, I shall give form and colour to the rose, and while its vivid blossoms cheer mankind, its perfumed odours shall ascend to heaven." A thatched water pump stands alongside the crossing point of several routes. Danish invaders were the first to settle here, recognizing its strategic importance. And much later, the town developed a linen and wool industry. The influence of Flemish weavers can be seen in the many Dutch gables and tall houses built to accommodate the enormous looms. The mill stands at the old navigable head of the River Bure, and wherry boats serviced a regular cargo trade with the Yarmouth coast until 1912, when floods destroyed many of the locks, leaving just this quiet and picturesque backwater. Aylsham is midway between the Broads and the coast of Cromer. ever popular holiday resort with miles of sandy beaches and dramatic cliffs. But the land is shrinking year by year. Centuries ago, this would all have been farmland, with the distant village of Shipton now lost deep under the waves. Some say its church bell still tolls on stormy nights. Cromer's 160-foot church tower is the tallest in the area, and tucked in alongside is a tiny museum housed in a row of fishermen's cottages. Here, Norfolk life, natural history and geology jumble together in a fascinating display. Fishing and shipping were the main way of life here until the railways brought tourists to the area. The Bure Valley Railway continues the tourist route from Aylsham to Wroxham, and is a delightful way to see the countryside. A stop at Coltishall en route is well worthwhile. Here the River Bure reaches the end of its present navigable channel and is a popular spot for leisure cruisers sailing the route, once used by wherries with cargoes of timber, coal, bricks and agricultural produce. The thatched church is well worth a visit. And the shops are a haven for antique hunters. Though Coltishall is perhaps better known for its RAF station, it's a surprisingly peaceful place to stop and load up with provisions for the next leg of your journey. The Waterside pub is another good reason for calling in before returning downstream at a leisurely pace. The River Bure takes a windy route through the countryside right into the heart of Broadland. Wroxham and Hoverton are linked by a low medieval bridge, much changed over the years to accommodate the busy traffic flow which surges through in high season. Wroxham developed as a holiday centre with the coming of the railways. Local boys with wheelbarrows would transport luggage to the boatyards for the princely sum of twopence. Boatyards were quick to seize the opportunity of tourism, as the canny Norfolk boatmen would see that roads and railways would soon put an end to their cargo-carrying business. For over 200 years, these sturdy, shallow-draft Norfolk wherry boats had carried cargoes of all types through Broadland and to the coastal ports. When trade dried up, many were abandoned and sunk, but some were converted to holiday use and still sail today. Hidden away on Womack Water, the Albion is the last surviving wherry in its original condition. Beautifully restored and maintained, it can still be seen sailing with its vast black sail, the mark of a trading boat. Wherries all have a Jenny at the top of the mast, named after a Welsh girl, Jenny Morgan, said to bring good luck. The Edwardians designed these elegant wherry yachts specifically for leisure travel. Wherry masts are pivoted so that they can quickly be lowered and raised without loss of speed when passing under low bridges like this one at Potterham, notorious for trapping unwary cruisers as it's only 7 feet high and very narrow. But let's get back to Wroxham Broad to start our day out. The wherry sail catching every last breath of wind. There are over 200 kilometers of navigable rivers and broads, home to a huge variety of wildlife. Perhaps they watch the antics of some leisure sailors with a wary eye now as holiday motor cruisers speed past, destroying the banks and waterside habitats. nature reserves and wildlife conservation areas offer a safe haven for birds, including the rare marsh harrier. Booming bitterns and swallowtail butterflies might be spotted at certain times of the year, but at every season, the waterfowl put on a delightful show. Cruising the Broads by boat is definitely the best way to get around, and it's possible to travel all the way into Norwich via the River Wensum. The cathedral with its 14th century spire is a glorious focal point. There are 33 medieval churches within the old Norman walls. Ancient ferry crossings and more recent waterside developments show a constantly evolving city. Though commercial water traffic is now much reduced, it offers the ideal mooring place for an excursion on dry land to see the sights. Ancient cobbled streets lead to the splendid Guildhall, now a tourist information centre. It's a beautiful Art Nouveau shopping arcade bedecked with a confection of tiles and glass. And at the heart of the city, a vast market square packed with stalls of every conceivable type. Towering above the town, a magnificent Norman castle, now a museum and art gallery. The Norwich School of Painters are always on view. Perhaps the most famous is J.S. Cotman, his watercolours and etchings reflecting the Broadland scene, like these studies of St. Benet's Abbey as it was around 1815, and still recognisable today, with an extraordinary windmill built inside the ruined Abbey Gatehouse, which attracts tourists from near and far.
The actual gatehouse was built in the 14th century.
What was built in
But the monastery itself dates from the 9th century.
St. Benet's was the only abbey in England not dissolved by Henry VIII. It was a very wealthy institution and owned lands all over Norfolk. Rents were often paid in kind. A nearby mill was leased for a rent of 4 fat cockerels. Other tenants offered payments of honey, spices, and even beer, which all went to keep the 26 monks here quite well provisioned. The cross marks the site of the high altar. And by the riverside you can still trace the foundations of houses and barns, a brewery and bakery, and landing stays. This self-contained foundation withstood a Norman siege for over 4 months, and could have outlasted the enemy had it not been for a treacherous gatekeeper who opened the gates to the invaders. The following day he was hanged from the gatehouse, and some say his screaming apparition still haunts the site. Nearby, Ludham was the site of the Bishop's Palace. At the centre of the 3 main Broadland rivers, the Thurne, the Bure and the Ant, for centuries it was a busy hub of activity with direct access to Norwich and Yarmouth. Ludham had specialists like millwrights, brickmakers, papermakers, saddlers and shoemakers, a smokehouse and a slaughterhouse, all long gone. The main stay is at Womack Water, just behind the village. Wherries brought coal, spirits and tobacco, returning with reeds, malt, corn or gravel. There are still 3 boatyards around Ludham, kept busy all year round building and maintaining holiday vessels. Even in winter, the Broads and rivers are active and full of interest. Norfolk reed is said to make the best thatch in the world, and reed cutting is still a living trade over most of Broadland, though carefully managed so as not to deplete this natural resource. The reed cutters work from low, shallow punts, which allow access to the tiny wild waterways and marshland. Reed stacks by the roadside are collected by the thatchers, who are much in demand as so many local houses still have their original topping. Even the village water pump and church are thatched at wood bastwick, and their sign also shows a thatched cottage. A little further north at Edingthorpe, another thatched church standing in splendid isolation. A good thatch should last about 70 years, but the decorative wheat straw ridge must be replaced more often. This lovely church is approached by a small track leading to a splendid oak memorial gateway, dedicated to the young heroes of Edingthorpe killed in the First World War. Inside, it's full of surprises. There are splendid wall paintings and decorated features. The 14th century rood screen may be the earliest in Norfolk, and a closer look shows odd holes, perhaps made by the bullets of Cromwell's soldiers. Siegfried Sassoon wrote, "It has a very special dignity and simplicity, standing there on its low hill above the harvest fields, as though it were the faithful servant of the life around it." The heart of the thatching industry was at North Walsham, where you may even find this thatched gatepost. Nowadays there are very few thatched buildings. They posed quite a fire risk. Indeed, in 1600, much of the town was destroyed by fire and rebuilt with tiled roofs. Narrow streets and alleys radiate from the church with its ruined tower dominating the surrounding area. North Walsham has many claims to fame. The Paston School, where young 10-year-old Horatio Nelson raided the headmaster's pear tree, giving the fruit to his hungry fellow pupils. The weather vane dates Nelson's death on the 21st of October 1805, and other buildings remember Nelson's victories. An ornate market cross stands at the centre of the town, a good place to shelter from the rain or the sun. North Walsham was linked to the Broads via a man-made canal, disused since 1935, but it's fascinating to follow the route to Dillon near Wayford Bridge. To imagine the wherries navigating these salted locks, busily carrying cargoes to villages and mills, now also derelict and forgotten under the growing cloak of vegetation. Another long-distance path is named after one of Norfolk's greatest industries, but after more than 500 years, it's all but vanished, leaving behind some splendid relics, like this vast church at Worstead. In 1420, William Paston wrote, "Though it be dearer than the others, I shall make my doublet all worsted for the glory of Norfolk." The rood screen is indeed glorious and reflects the wealth of those far-off times. Flemish weavers settled here because Norfolk sheep produced long wool which could be spun and woven into the fine cloth which took the name of the village. back to a Broadland church, at Ranworth with its tall tower offering splendid views. Surprisingly, the Broads are not a natural feature. They were, in fact, man-made. Peat digging for fuel had been carried on for centuries here until the rising sea level finally flooded the diggings in 1287. The landscape is still changing and evolving as the wind pumps fight a losing battle against the silting of the channels. Horsey Mere and Windmill are at the eastern edge of the Broads, just a 30-minute walk to the sea. There are miles of sandy beaches, and at Caister the remains of a Roman town built for trade with the Rhineland and its fine wines, glassware and pottery. Caister hit the headlines at the turn of the century when 9 brave lifeboatmen died. The inquest said they should never have attempted the rescue, to which the father of 2 of the dead said, "Caister men never turn back," a phrase immortalized in lifeboat service history.
I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray and the blown spew, and the seagulls cry. I must go down to the seas again, to the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way, where the wind's like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trick's over.
Haysborough Lighthouse, a landmark warning of the dangerous offshore shallows, and the church at Haysborough standing guard over the graves of many luckless mariners. In 1801, HMS Invincible, on its way to join Nelson's fleet, foundered on the Haysborough sands. 119 of its crew are buried here. Inside the church, wild woodsmen and lions support the 15th century font, topped by musical angels. And this is how Haysborough is spelt. The village sign also shows a lifeboat. Perhaps the most famous Norfolk lifeboatman was Henry Blogg, coxswain of Cromer Lifeboat for over 50 years. He and his crew rescued 873 souls from the deep. There's an interesting lifeboat museum by the beach, run by the RNLI. And it's also possible to see the current boat, every hand-polished shining inch of it, ready for instant action when needed. The lifeboat station is at the end of the pier, housed in an elegant boathouse. Cromer's other great claim to fame is the legend of Poppyland. A Victorian journalist, Clement Scott, was enchanted by this area of Norfolk. His articles and poems stirred the Victorian imagination and gave birth to the Poppyland tourist industry. Famous socialites, actors and writers flocked to stay in the mill house at Overstrand, where the miller's pretty daughter offered simple, clean and friendly accommodation, and was especially known for her delicious blackberry pudding. Millionaires came and built grand houses, and resorts all along the coast cashed in on the tourist boom. Scott's poem about crumbling Side Strand Church was on everyone's lips. Even the railway company used his words to promote the area. Clement Scott is remembered with this splendid drinking fountain. The miller's daughter fell on hard times, gleaning a meagre existence by selling blackberries door to door. She died alone and destitute in 1934, long after the Garden of Sleep had slipped into the sea. Perhaps it's the ever-changing nature of the scene, season by season and year by year, which makes these coastal villages so fascinating and surprising. Poppyland, meadowland and broadland. The seaside at high tide or low tide. A season of frozen mists or shimmering summer heat. Take your pick. Norfolk is waiting to surprise you.